They say history only remembers the queens who win. The others are buried beneath the sand, erased by scribes, cut from monuments, reduced to whispers. Cleopatra VII, last queen of Egypt, survived through beauty, brilliance, politics, and legend. But she had a sister, older, sharper, and in many ways more dangerous. Her name was Arsinoe, and her fate was so horrific, so humiliating, that ancient writers tried to bury it along with her body. For if Cleopatra was the serpent crowned in gold, Arsinoe was the shadow behind her throne, born with the same royal blood, the same ambition, the same claim to Egypt. And in the world of pharaohs, there was room for only one. Arsinoe was born into a dynasty soaked in betrayal. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt not by unity, but by paranoia. Sisters poisoned brothers. Mothers strangled sons. Husbands and wives battled for the throne, each convinced the gods favored them alone. Children grew up learning not trust, but strategy. A smile was a weapon, a gesture was a threat. In such a world, Arsinoe and Cleopatra were not siblings. They were rivals destined from birth to walk the same path toward a single throne. Cleopatra, younger but far more charismatic, could charm soldiers, diplomats, and tutors with the ease of a born queen. Arsinoe, however, had a mind that cut sharper than a Macedonian blade. She studied military tactics while other princesses studied poetry. She watched generals train the army. She learned the movements of phalanxes and siege towers. She understood that in Egypt, power did not belong to the most beloved. It belonged to the last one standing. When their father died, the kingdom fell into chaos. Cleopatra claimed the throne with the confidence of destiny. Arsinoe watched her sister rise, listened to her speeches, saw the crowds adore her. Outwardly she bowed. Inwardly she prepared. She knew Cleopatra would not share the throne. She knew Cleopatra would rule alone. And so Arsinoe played the one card she had left, rebellion. When Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria and sided with Cleopatra, Arsinoe saw her chance. She escaped the palace, rallied Egyptian troops loyal to her family, and declared herself Queen of Egypt. She was barely 15, yet soldiers followed her. Generals obeyed her. She took command of the Egyptian revolt, leading her forces against Caesar himself. Cleopatra may have seduced Rome, but Arsinoe dared to fight it. The Battle of Alexandria became the stage where the sisters' true natures were revealed. Cleopatra watched from Caesar's side, cloaked in silk, whispering strategy into the ears of the greatest general alive. Arsinoe, armored in bronze, stood on the walls of Alexandria as fire rained from Roman siege engines. She rallied her men with a voice that carried across the battlefield. The Romans were stunned. They had expected a child. They found a commander. Arsinoe even forced Caesar to retreat at one point, pushing back his legions and capturing his prized general Ganymedes. It was a humiliation Caesar never forgot, nor did Cleopatra. But Egypt was doomed to lose. Rome was an ocean, and Arsinoe was a single tide. When the city finally fell, Arsinoe was dragged from the temple where she had sought sanctuary. Her wrists were bound, her weapons taken, her name stripped. Cleopatra watched this with eyes cold as obsidian. She knew perfectly well what Caesar intended. He would take Arsinoe to Rome as a trophy. Cleopatra said nothing. She let it happen. And so began Arsinoe's descent into the fate Egypt tried to erase. She was carried across the Mediterranean in chains, displayed like a captured animal. When she reached Rome, Caesar prepared a spectacle the city would never forget. Triumphs were Roman theater, celebrations of conquest where defeated kings, rebels, and prisoners were paraded before crowds before being executed. But what Caesar planned for Arsinoe was more than a show. It was a warning to anyone who defied him. The day of the triumph arrived with roaring crowds, drums beating like thunder, the smell of incense and sweat thick in the air. And then she appeared. Arsinoe, princess of Egypt, royal blood of Alexander the Great, descendant of pharaohs, was forced to walk barefoot through the streets of Rome, chained, surrounded by guards, while tens of thousands screamed for her death. Cleopatra would never have endured such humiliation. But Arsinoe had no choice. She walked with her head raised, refusing to break. The Romans watched this girl, barely a woman, and something unexpected happened. Pity. A murmur of unease moved through the crowd. They had seen defeated kings before, but never a teenager who had dared challenge Caesar and survived. They demanded her life, but reluctantly. Yet, at the moment where every conquered ruler was traditionally executed, Caesar paused. He looked at Arsinoe, then at the uneasy crowd. Executing a young girl would make him seem cruel. Sparing her would make him seem merciful, and so he chose mercy. It was a political performance, nothing more. Arsinoe was given temporary freedom, but not truly. Caesar exiled her to the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, a sanctuary where she would live watched, isolated, and powerless. But Cleopatra knew better. Exile was not safety. It was delay. Cleopatra feared Arsinoe more than any Roman soldier. She knew her sister carried not only royal blood, but the loyalty of Egyptian rebels. Cleopatra understood that as long as Arsinoe lived, there was a threat to the throne. And so Cleopatra waited, patient, silent, coiled like the cobra she wore upon her brow. Years passed. Arsinoe lived in the sanctuary, praying, studying, trying to rebuild her spirit. She dreamed of returning to Egypt. She dreamed of reclaiming her birthright, but such dreams were dangerous. Cleopatra held Rome in her palm. And when Mark Antony joined her, she gained something even more powerful, a weapon with authority to eliminate any threat. Cleopatra whispered in Antony's ear about her sister. She told him that Arsinoe's existence was a danger to the peace of Egypt. Antony listened. And when a queen who commanded the wealth of the Nile makes a request, Rome obeys. The order was given. Soldiers traveled to the temple. They dragged Arsinoe out from her sanctuary. She fought, she screamed, she begged the gods. But the ancient laws of the temple meant nothing to Rome. On the temple steps, beneath the statue of Artemis, Arsinoe was executed. No trial, no ritual, no mercy. Her blood stained the marble, a princess murdered in a place where no blood had ever been shed. It was an act that scandalized even Rome. Killing someone in a holy sanctuary was unthinkable. But Antony had done it, and everyone understood why. Cleopatra wanted her sister erased from history, and so she was. But history cannot erase what the earth remembers. And the story of Arsinoe, the girl who defied Caesar, the princess who led armies, the sister Cleopatra feared, survived in fragments, carved into stones, written in secret scrolls, whispered by those who saw her walk Rome in chains. Cleopatra earned a throne. Arsinoe earned a legend. They said that when Arsinoe's blood touched the marble steps of the temple at Ephesus, the earth itself trembled, as if the gods were protesting the violation of their sanctuary. But no tremor could undo what had been done. Arsinoe, daughter of Egypt, sister of Cleopatra, claimant to the throne, lay dead under the open sky while Roman soldiers wiped their blades and avoided each other's eyes. Killing her was easy. Forgetting her would prove harder. The priests of Artemis watched in horror, their faces pale beneath their robes. They knew the sanctuary had been sacred for 1,000 years. No weapon had ever been allowed within its boundaries. Kings, fugitives, criminals, all had found protection there, for not even the most ruthless conqueror dared violate the goddess law. But Antony had done it, at Cleopatra's request. And in doing so, he had awakened something ancient and vengeful in the hearts of those who believed the temple was more than stone. The priests sent word across Asia Minor, telling everyone who would listen that a terrible sin had been committed. The whispers grew like vines twisting around the name of Cleopatra. The Queen of the Nile, once admired for her brilliance, now became a figure of dread. People claimed she had bewitched Antony. Others insisted she had offered sacrifices to foreign gods to gain such influence. But the darkest rumor of all was the one that spread fastest. Cleopatra had ordered the murder of her own sister inside a holy sanctuary. True or not, the tale clung to her like a shadow. Cleopatra, back in Alexandria, received the news with a calmness that frightened even her loyal servants. She sat upon her golden throne, fingers draped across the carved arms, her expression unreadable. Antony delivered the order himself, telling her that Arsinoe was dead and that the threat to Egypt had been eliminated forever. Cleopatra bowed her head as if accepting a blessing. No tears, no relief, no regret. Egypt had taught her long ago that rulers who cried rarely lived long. But inside her, something tightened. She had won, yet victory tasted bitter. Because Arsinoe had not been a distant enemy or a foreign rival. She had been blood, she had been childhood. She had been the one mirror in the palace that had reflected Cleopatra's own ambition back at her with equal fire. In the months that followed, Cleopatra tried to erase all trace of Arsinoe's existence. She ordered royal scribes to alter records. Monuments were recarved. Coins bearing Arsinoe's likeness were melted down. The chronicles of court historians were edited to remove her name. For Cleopatra, it was necessary. A queen who inherited a throne built on betrayal could not afford a legacy that included a sister who had once defied Rome and nearly won. But memory does not bow to queens. The sailors who ferried messages across the seas whispered the truth to every port. The merchants who traveled through Ephesus repeated the tale of the murdered princess. The priests kept the story alive by telling pilgrims that the sanctuary had been defiled by royal blood. And those who hated Rome now had a symbol of resistance, a martyr killed not by an empire alone, but by the ambition of her own kin. Meanwhile, Antony began to feel the weight of what he had done. Ephesus was a place he had once loved, a city that had worshipped him when he marched through its streets. Now it looked at him with suspicion. The people whispered behind his back. The temples barred their doors to him. Even his own soldiers began muttering that he had angered the gods. Antony had shed blood many times, but this was different. Killing a young woman inside a sanctuary violated a rule older than any empire. It branded him not as a conqueror, but as a desecrator. Yet he could not admit his regret, for Cleopatra expected strength, so he buried his guilt beneath wine and war. But the guilt remained, dragging him deeper into the spiral that would one day destroy him. Arsinoe, however, did not fade. In death she grew more powerful than she had ever been in life. The people saw her as a symbol of defiance, the girl who had dared to lead armies against Caesar, who had survived a Roman triumph, who had outlived exile only to be slaughtered at the order of her own sister. Even in Rome, senators murmured that Cleopatra was too dangerous, too ambitious, too willing to spill blood. Some claimed she was corrupting Antony. Others feared that if she gained more influence, she would use Roman power to eliminate every threat to her throne. And so Arsinoe's spirit became a ghost haunting Cleopatra's every political move, an accusation that could not be silenced by edits in scrolls or chisels in stone. But the one place Arsinoe could not be erased was the temple where she died. The priests refused to remove her body, insisting it had been placed there by divine protest. They wrapped her in linen with more care than any royal burial in Egypt. They placed her within a simple tomb near the edge of the sanctuary, marked only by a carved lotus. Visitors who saw it whispered prayers, not because they loved her, but because they feared the wrath her death might bring. A murdered princess in a sacred sanctuary was an omen, and people treated it as such. Years passed. Cleopatra's power grew, but so did the pressure around her. Rome watched her with a mixture of fascination and fear. Her enemies reminded the Senate that she had once dared defy Caesar by backing her sister. They claimed her charm was a weapon and her ambition limitless. And behind each accusation lay the shadow of Arsinoe, the sister Cleopatra had removed because her existence was an unending threat. The story became a weapon used by political rivals, whispered behind doors in marble halls. Some went further, insisting Cleopatra would one day destroy Rome itself if she gained too much influence through Antony. The Senate believed it, Octavian believed it. And though history blames Antony for the war that followed, the truth is more complex. Cleopatra had survived too many threats, and Arsinoe had been the first sign that Cleopatra would eliminate anything that stood between her and the throne. When Cleopatra and Antony finally fell, defeated by Octavian, Some said it was the gods avenging Arsinoe. Others believed that Rome used the story of the murdered princess to justify cleansing Egypt of its queen. When Octavian entered Alexandria, he did so with a coldness Cleopatra had once reserved only for her sister. And as he sifted through Cleopatra's legacy, deciding what to preserve and what to destroy, he found records of Arsinoe. He read how she had led the revolt, how she had survived the triumph, how she had died on temple steps. Octavian smiled, for he knew the power of such a story. He declared Cleopatra a danger to Rome. He spread tales of her cruelty. He painted her as a foreign sorceress who corrupted Roman generals. Arsinoe became a tool in his propaganda, proof that Cleopatra had always been a threat. And thus Arsinoe, erased by her sister, was resurrected by her sister's enemies. A cruel irony that history would never forget. Cleopatra died with her legend intact, choosing her own end rather than facing the humiliation of being paraded like a prisoner. But Arsinoe did not choose her fate. It was chosen for her by a dynasty that devoured itself, by a world that placed crowns above kin, by a sister who saw in her not family but competition. To this day, scholars debate how much of Arsinoe's story was truth and how much was shaped by propaganda. But one fact remains undeniable. Arsinoe, a girl barely past childhood, became the last obstacle between Cleopatra and absolute rule. And Cleopatra responded with the ruthlessness of a queen who refused to share her destiny. Arsinoe lost her throne, her home, her freedom, and finally her life. But in losing everything, she became the one thing Cleopatra never intended, a symbol of the sister Egypt tried to erase and failed. They said that a queen can command armies, bend nations, and seduce empires, but she can never command memory. Cleopatra learned this truth only after Arsinoe was dead, when the world refused to forget a sister she had tried so hard to erase. In Alexandria, Cleopatra walked through palace halls lined with polished stone that reflected her every step, every breath. Yet no surface could reflect her without also whispering of the girl who had once shared these corridors. Servants lowered their eyes when Cleopatra passed, but their silence felt heavy, as if filled with unspoken knowledge. The Queen of Egypt had removed her rival, but she had not removed the shadow that rival left behind. Sometimes Cleopatra dreamed of Arsinoe, not the young woman who had stood on the steps of the temple with terror in her eyes, but the child she had once been. They had grown up together in the palace of the Ptolemies, a place of marble, gold, and venom. They played together by the lotus pools, reciting verses from Greek poets, chasing each other beneath columns carved with the deeds of gods their dynasty claimed as ancestors. But the palace had also taught them its oldest lesson. Siblings were not companions. They were contenders. The throne could not be shared. Every smile held suspicion. Every embrace hid jealousy. The daughters of pharaohs learned early that only one could survive the crown. Cleopatra had been strong enough to accept that truth. Arsinoe had refused to. As the years passed, the memory of Arsinoe transformed across the empire. In Asia Minor, she became a martyr. In Rome, she became a symbol of Cleopatra's danger. In Egypt, she became a ghost people pretended not to see. But Cleopatra saw her everywhere, in whispers behind market stalls, in foreign envoys who avoided the queen's gaze out of fear or judgment. Even in Antonin's eyes when he thought she was not looking, she sensed doubt flickering like a dying flame. He had killed many men in battle, but Arsinoe was different. Her execution at Cleopatra's request had carved a small crack in Antony's spirit, a crack that widened with every political failure, every military setback, every moment his soldiers questioned his loyalty to Rome. Rome itself had changed since Arsinoe's death. Octavian watched everything with cold, calculating patience. He spoke rarely of Cleopatra, but when he did, his words were like precise blades. He portrayed her not as a queen, but as a serpent, a temptress, a murderer of her own sister. Every senator who already feared Antony now feared Cleopatra twice as much. And so an invisible war began, not on battlefields, but in speeches, scrolls, and whispers. Arsinoe became a weapon forged in silence by men who understood the power of outrage. Cleopatra had built her rule upon intellect, charm, and political brilliance. But no power, not even hers, could silence a story once it left her grasp. She could command sphinx carved in her likeness, paint her image upon temple walls, and inscribe her lineage in gold. But she could not command the tongues of sailors, merchants, travelers, priests, and spies who carried Arsinoe's name like a forbidden offering. Nor could she silence the priests of Artemis who told pilgrims the tale of the murdered princes and the desecrated sanctuary. Every time a pilgrim left Ephesus, they carried that tale across the sea. Every time it reached a new shore, Cleopatra grew darker in the eyes of the world. And behind the gossip lay another truth. The dynasty of the Ptolemies had always been built on blood. Cleopatra merely followed a tradition older than her. Her ancestors had murdered siblings, spouses, parents, and rivals in order to protect the throne, but Cleopatra was one of the last. And in her final years, she realized that she had inherited not a kingdom of glory but a legacy of ghosts. When Antony lost the Battle of Actium, Cleopatra felt the shift in the world. The sea had turned against them. Rome had turned against them. And every failure echoed with the memory of the sister she had once removed. Cleopatra did not blame Arsinoe, but deep inside, she knew that Antony had been weakened long before Actium. The guilt he carried from Ephesus had weighed on his soul like wet stone. Men who doubt themselves are already defeated before battle even begins. In the chaos that followed their retreat to Alexandria, Cleopatra began preparing for the only outcome she knew she could control. If defeat came, she would not be paraded through the streets of Rome as Arsinoe had been. She had watched her sister dragged in chains during Caesar's triumph. She had observed the spectacle from a shadowed balcony, unseen by the crowds. Arsinoe had walked barefoot, bruised, terrified, forced to kneel before the same empire that would one day kneel before Cleopatra herself. Cleopatra had sworn that day that she would never give Rome that satisfaction. She would die a queen or not at all. As Octavian advanced, Cleopatra retreated deeper into the palace where she had spent her childhood. She walked through forgotten corridors, touching walls that had heard the secrets of her dynasty. In one hall, she paused at a mosaic showing the daughters of King Ptolemy playing beneath a sun of gold. Two girls in the mosaic held lotus flowers. Cleopatra realized with a chill that one of them looked like Arsinoe. She turned away quickly, but not before a single tear escaped. It burned her cheek like acid. Antony fell soon after, his death a tragic echo of the man he had once been. Cleopatra, left alone, knew the end had arrived. Octavian entered Alexandria with the arrogance of a man who believed the gods had chosen him. He demanded that Cleopatra surrender. She offered him treasure. She offered him alliances. But he wanted something else. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted the Queen of Egypt to kneel in chains, a trophy to display before the Senate. The same fate that had once befallen Arsinoe, but Cleopatra had already prepared her escape. In a chamber guarded by loyal servants, she arranged her own death. Some say she used a serpent, others say poison. The truth does not matter. What matters is that she died by her own hand, defying the empire that had tried to claim her life in her story. Her final act was not surrender, but control. Yet even in death, she was not free of Arsinoe, because the story that would shape Cleopatra's legacy was not written by Egyptians, but by Romans. And the Romans preferred tales that magnified their victories and justified their cruelty. Octavian ordered Cleopatra's death recorded as a moral lesson, portraying her as a decadent queen whose sins destroyed her kingdom. He ensured the tale of Arsinoe was spread widely, using it to depict Cleopatra as a woman willing to kill her own blood to preserve power. It was the perfect narrative, and Rome embraced it. But history, like the Nile, has its own currents. Centuries later, archaeologists uncovered a tomb in Ephesus marked by a carved lotus. Inside were the remains of a young woman. Some scholars believe it was Arsinoe, others deny it. But the debate itself proves something deeper. Cleopatra erased her sister's name from scrolls, but she could not erase her from time. Arsinoe lived on in legends, in ruins, in whispers. She became a symbol of resistance, of tragedy, of a dynasty built on ambition and consumed by it. Cleopatra became the last pharaoh of Egypt. Arsinoe became the last warning of what it cost. In the end, the sisters were bound together more tightly in death than they had ever been in life.